Well, now we're about to read of a storm that experienced fishermen encountered. They've been on that lake all their lives, facing lots of storms, but nothing like this. We pick up the account in John 6 and we start reading from verse 15. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Now this was a literal storm, but we often use the word storm as a picture for the storms of life, don't we? And this wasn't just a storm for these men, it was a trial as well. So whether we call it a trial or storm, we all know what it's like to have the winds of adversity blow. We know what it's like to have waves of worry rise up. Everybody knows what it's like to experience the darkness of isolation and the fear that comes from that. Just like these disciples experienced, we all have storms. James called them many kinds, and you know what he said about them? "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds." Okay, but who does that? And trials come big, small, physical, emotional, or spiritual. Some are brief. Some are long, lasting weeks, months, or even years. I believe we can navigate these storms and do a good job of it. We can have peace in the middle of them. But for that to happen, there's some things we need to know. In fact, there are 4 things that come out of John 6 and also Mark 6. The same story is told, and each account gives different detail, just as you get from witnesses to an event. First, storms are not predictable. You see, the disciples had no clue what was about to happen. The lead up to this event is thousands and thousands of people being fed miraculously. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Now, for these disciples, this boat ride was completely unexpected. Jesus' approval ratings were at their highest. People were thrilled and wanting to make Jesus their king. And Jesus went back up the mountain. Well, you can't go back up the mountain unless you go down the mountain. So here he was up on the mountain. He had fed everybody, and now he walks down the mountain before he goes back up. Now, why does he walk down the mountain? Jesus wants to get away from the crowd because they have a political agenda and he doesn't want to be part of it. And also to walk his disciples down to the Sea of Galilee, to get a boat and shove them off so that he can be alone with his Father. So he puts them in a boat, and a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. Now, a Greek word here means the waves and sea woke up out of nowhere. And in life, haven't you noticed that circumstances change unexpectedly? We make plans, then something happens and the circumstances blow us in a completely different direction. We hadn't planned this. You remember Paul planned to go to Rome. What he didn't plan on is getting arrested in Jerusalem. What he didn't plan on is becoming a prisoner for 2 years. And though he went to Rome, he didn't plan on getting there in a grain ship from Egypt as a prisoner on the way to Rome. His plans changed. And now as the boat left harbour and it was a sunny, beautiful day, something happened. A storm came. Acts says that the weather changed abruptly and a typhoon-strength wind caught the ship and blew it out to sea. And as you go for a routine medical checkup, they find a mass and tell you to clear your plans for a while. And everything was just sailing along until the boss says, "I'm sorry, but we have to let you go." You hear that news and then suddenly the wind changes and you go in a totally different direction. It's like having your ticket in hand and going to a bus station and somebody meets you and says, "I've got a different ticket for you," and you're not going where you think you're going. So you get on the bus with this new ticket and you have no idea what this is about and when you will get off. Now, this is not unusual, is it? In fact, this is normal life. A Jewish proverb says, "Man makes plans and God changes them." Even if we are a child of God, the weather can change suddenly and abruptly. And Paul spoke of hardships that he and his team encountered. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. I'm so glad that he wrote that. Because now when I encounter people who say, "It's been so difficult and hard for me lately, and I've despaired of life," I can say, "You realise you're not alone?" Paul didn't think he was going to make it. That's normal life. Jesus is not just about a free lunch on a hill. He is the God of the storm. And as the disciples are about to find out how much a God of the storm, storms are not predictable. Why did they get into the boat? It wasn't their idea. Jesus made them get into the boat. And this is the second lesson. God is in charge. So if we have an Invictus ideology that says, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul," good luck on that one. Coming to Christ, we give him the keys to our life. He is in charge. There's a detail in Mark 6:45 worth noting here. Immediately Jesus made, notice that word, made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. See that? He made them do it. What does that tell us? Well, they didn't want to go. Can you just hear it? "Where are we going, Jesus?" "Just follow me." "But where are we going?" "We're going to the lake." "Okay, here we are. Now what?" "Get in the boat." "Are you coming?" "No, you get in the boat." "We don't want to get in the boat. You just miraculously fed thousands of people. We're sticking to you like glue." "Get in the boat." Do you see it? He made them go. Do you know why? Because he's the captain and they are just the crew. Up to this point, that wasn't the case. Peter was the captain, Andrew was the captain. They had their fishing business. They knew about lakes like this, but now they do what Jesus says. He is the captain. If you have this car sticker on your car, I apologise for what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you have the car sticker saying, God is my co-pilot, you might want to take that off. Because you see, God won't be anybody's co-pilot. You might be allowed to come along for the ride, but he is in charge. And Jesus got them in that boat, sending them out into the sea. Now, why is this so important? Because it is. Because it means that when the storm is raging, we can confidently say, God brought me into this storm. So this is the question. Were the disciples in that storm because they were disobedient? Were they bad disciples, and only bad little disciples have storms in their lives? Were they in that storm because they were out of God's will? No. And I bring that up because there are some people saying real Christians won't go through these things. But they were in that storm because they were in the centre of God's will. Jesus put them in the boat and sent them into the storm. Now, why would he do that? Well, go back to Exodus when Israel leaves Egypt and starts to go to the promised land, and God tells them where to go, but also gives the exact route on how to get there. And they were not given the direct route. God put them on a detour, bringing them to the Red Sea. To the sides were mountains and a desert. It was impassable. Before them was a body of water. It was uncrossable. So they thought, this is ridiculous because we're in a cul-de-sac. And behind them, there was this crazy Egyptian army boxing them in. So God was deliberately trapping them. And it was to show them that he has resources they know nothing about. You see, God can get them out of situations that are impossible for us. And it is with this storm. And knowing that will revolutionize our pain, pressures and problems. If we realize I'm just the crew, God is the captain. He brought me to this place. My captain sent me into this storm. That's huge. I mean, what makes me think that if I am a Christian, that my life should be somehow smooth sailing? A few years ago, churches went through a phase of taking the tunes of a secular song and putting Christian words to them. An example was the Simon and Garfunkel song, Bridge Over Troubled Water. We were asked to sing, when you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, he'll dry them all, he's on your side. When times get rough and you don't know what to do, like a bridge over troubled waters, he'll carry you. Well, I'm glad that we've moved on from that phase, because God is not a bridge over troubled water, but a pathway through them. And yet I know some Christians who have that notion. If I'm a Christian and I'm obedient, only good things will happen. Really? Oh my, we will be such a shallow person if that were true. Charles Haddon Spurgeon spoke to his congregation saying, "Those who are the most sympathizing, loving, Christ-like are those who have had the most affliction. The worst thing that can happen to any of us is to have our path made too smooth." Isn't that interesting? And now you know what I might be praying for you if you come up and you're really a cantankerous person. Lord, send him a storm, make him a lovely person. That's how God may well do it. The Neitha Risnell has suffered greatly over many years. And looking back on the trials and the spiritual growth curve it's been for her, she writes honestly, saying she would have preferred another journey, but said, "Storms are disguised helps." And here's what we must note. We can make our plans, and we should, but understand that if we write the script, that God always has editing rights. We set the course for the boat, but God can always come in and alter the course, and at times does. Storms are not predictable, but God is in charge. He is the captain and we are just the crew. Mark that down. And then thirdly, if we get sent into the storm, resources will be provided. A strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, the Sea of Galilee is only about 7 to 8 miles wide and 12 to 13 miles in diameter, so they were right in the middle of the lake. And they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Now, if we put all the stories together, here's 3 great things that we can discover about Jesus. He knows, he prays, and he comes. He knew exactly what was happening. Do we believe that for ourselves? Do we think Jesus was up on the mountain praying and he didn't know what was happening to the disciples? Is God ever out of the office gone fishing? Does God ever go, "Oh, I didn't know that. That's a new one on me. I'm sorry." He knew exactly. Mark says when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. Wasn't going to impose himself upon them. He saw them straining at the oars. He had good eyesight to see a boat 4 miles away when inland on top of a hill. Now, I've been on the Sea of Galilee and I couldn't see a mile away with the haze. And not only see that there's a boat, but having such detail and seeing that the people aboard that boat are having a difficult time straining at the oars, that's good eyesight. Actually, I would say it's impossible to see that way unless you can see some other way. And that's the point, isn't it? He is God. And he knew exactly what was going on. And he could see it. He knew it in advance. That's a good thing to think about. And what does God know? God knows everything. Jesus said that God knows the number of the hairs of our head. Now, for some, that sum is getting easier every year. We don't style it parted or unparted, but departed. But God knows. And that's the first resource we have, even if we can't see or feel God. Though he is not apparent, He is aware. Let that go round and round our minds. And also, he prays. Mark says, after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Now, what is Jesus praying for? Well, we don't know, but at least partly, surely, for the disciples. I mean, after all, he knows what's going on in the boat and the struggle that his friends are having. Now, I have a question. How would we feel if we knew that Jesus was in the next room praying for us? Would that give us confidence to say, I can handle this problem? Well, that's the news flash. He is. You see, it says in Hebrews, he, that's Jesus, is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. That's what Jesus lives for. He is at the Father's right hand and he prays for us. Every trial we have, Jesus is talking to the Father about us. And if anybody knows how to pray, it's him, right? He knows what suffering is about. So when he talks to the Father about our pain, our issues, our circumstances, our stress, our problems, it's because he knows it firsthand. He knows. He prays. Let that go round our minds. And then you're ready for the third resource. He comes to them in the storm. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Now, I have a question, and if you know Mark's account, you know the answer. When did Jesus come to them? What part of the night? What watch of the night? The answer is the 4th watch. Now, why did Mark tell us that? Because he wants us to know how long those disciples have been out there. You see, they probably left at sunset. It was evening and the sun was setting. It was getting dark. And the night is divided into 4 watches, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., 9 p.m. to midnight, midnight to 3 a.m. And the 4th watch of the night was 3 a.m. to 6 in the morning. And that's when Jesus came to them. You know what that means? They had been out on the Sea of Galilee, rowing for their lives, struggling, suffering, frightened, stressed out, from between 8 to 12 hours. When they were near exhaustion, at the very end of their wits and could go no further, Jesus showed up. Now, I'm sure if they could have voted, they would have said, "Could you please come during the 1st watch of the night?" But he didn't come the 1st, 2nd, or the 3rd, but he came between 3 in the morning and 6 in the morning, and they were exhausted. But he came nonetheless. Listen. If God has us in a storm, he has his eye on that storm and he has his hand on those waves. And he is not going to allow anything to happen to us that can't be handled by him. So here's the question. Why did Jesus walk on the water? Did he come to impress them? Of course not. It wasn't just to wow them. Jesus came to them on the very thing they feared the most. the storm. They feared the storm and thought they were going to die because of this water and what was happening to it. Those waves were big and the boat was about to toss over, and Jesus came to them on the very thing they feared the most. It became the footpath of Christ to them. Now, I know we all hate storms. We dread the idea of a possible surgery, of a death of a loved one, or a loss of any kind. But I also know that in the darkest moment, people say, I have never experienced God like I did then. Corrie ten Boom was part of a family that sheltered Jews in World War II. They were arrested and she was put in a concentration camp. She said, if God ever sends you on stony paths, he'll provide good shoes. And I would add, if God sends us in a storm, he provides great boats. He will provide the resources that we need. He knows, he prays, he comes. And one more point. Storms won't last forever. The sky will clear. Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. That storm didn't last a week, month, or a year. Some storms do. This storm had a beginning and an end. And if there's one thing I've noticed about storms, God knows when to end them and have the sun come out. It doesn't mean we will never have another, but he knows how to time them. Now remember, Peter was on the boat, and years later he wrote a letter in which he said, for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. You see, there is a time that they begin and a time that they end. And did you notice another miracle here? Immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. So they get Jesus on the boat and it's like, whoa, we've arrived, we're here. You know what that tells us? The hardship and trial didn't waste any time for those disciples. You see, I hear people say, if only I didn't have this in my life. I could do this, I could do that. But I don't think we waste any time if God has us in a time of trial and adversity. I think he's quite able to get us to the right destination at the right time, and we will not be wasting any time, okay? So, let's watch our attitude during a storm, because it's very disorientating. Are those times. It tends toward us not only asking why, it tends toward complaining. Why, Lord? Why me? Why now? Why this? And that questioning can lead to bitterness. Watch our attitude during a storm. Think about it. Why does God put me in the boat, send me out to the storm, change the weather, and then change it again? Why does he do all that? Because he's still working on us? I don't know if you know this or not, but we are not perfect. You know that, don't you? We've got a lot of growth to do. Amen? So because of that, God is going to be working on us. And when he has finished working on us, we will flatline and go to heaven. Now, I know you're thinking, Lord, just keep working on me. It's too early. Oh, he will. And without our counsel, God knows everything we are going through and exactly what's best for us. It's timed and it's planned. And now the disciples do something very smart. They willingly receive Jesus into the boat. That's a smart thing to do. You see, whenever there is a storm, get Jesus in the boat, because the boat is not sinking if he is on board. Is it worth sailing through life without Christ? So far, so good. The weather is good. I haven't been in a storm yet. One is coming. We don't want to go without Jesus in the boat in your life. So if you haven't invited him into your life, now is a great time to do that.